Hi, I'm Marty Nemko. Those of you who may have watched my last YouTube video or listened to my last podcast knows that I picked the darkest stories from my new book, Soloists, which are short stories of introverts and outsiders facing a dilemma. And I thought I would pick out the ones that are, some of them that are upbeat. From the 234, there's about maybe 15 of them. Probably take almost an hour worth, but you can always press stop when you get bored and find something else. There's always something else on the internet. Anyway, this first one's called Fantasy Traffic School. I got stopped by the highway patrol. You know how fast you were going? No, sir. You were doing 77 and a 65. I'll give you a break. I'll just write you up for 75 and a 65. I thought, you should be nominated for sainthood. But instead I just asked, how much will it be? You'll be notified by mail. I put my head down and I sighed. It came in the mail all right, $515. Or if I want to go to traffic school, a mere $380 plus the traffic school's $99 fee. That's almost $500. But then it doesn't go on my record, so my insurance won't go up. I picked Carload of Laughs Traffic School, and I'm glad I did. I didn't think it would be a good choice. I showed up and there were a couple of dozen other violators and an instructor who looked like he'd rather have a root canal. He mumbled, "Okay, 6 hours, 45 minutes, you get your certificate. Let's get started. Your car must be how many feet behind a stopped school bus?" An eager beaver raised her hand. 20 feet. The instructor went, like on a TV quiz show, and said, "Far enough that you can't hear the kids farting." Just kidding, you're right, 20 feet. How does a cop know you've run a stop sign? We were quick learners from the eager beaver's experience, so none of us raised our hand. And he said, "You run a stop sign if you jog past it." Only one person even bothered to groan. He said, "Just kidding. The cop sees if your wheels have completely stopped turning." Why shouldn't you speed? "'Cause you might get caught. $500 ka-chang." Seriously, you know why it's wrong to speed. After 45 minutes of this, he said, "Let's take our first break." He seemed the most eager one to get out of the classroom. After a minute of commiseration with my fellow lawbreakers, I also wanted out of that stuffy room, so I wandered outside. Instead of hanging out with some fellow scholars in front of the building, I moped to the back. It's fun to see what we're not supposed to see, usually stuff like used oil from a restaurant or broken crockery from a houseplant store. But this time I struck gold. There was our burnout instructor, smoking a joint. That was manna from heaven for me. As soon as he saw me, he flung the joint away. I sauntered over, picked it up, smelled it to confirm, and said, "You need a little something to try to make you funny?" He said, "Please don't tell anyone." I strutted back into the torture chamber, classroom, where most of my fellow students were hanging out, and I told them what I saw. When the instructor returned, he acted like nothing had happened, but I wasn't going to let that happen. I said, "So, Mr. Instructor, I understand that you've decided to end the course right now and give us all our certificate of completion." He said, "Huh?" Whereupon I started chanting, "Weed, weed, weed, cert, 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 weed, 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 cert, cert, cert," and the attendees joined the chorus. The final nail in his coffin was when I said, "Now, you don't want me to go to your company and tell them about your weedy stoner break, do you? Like our tickets, it would go on your record, and that would cost more than a hike in your insurance." From the paper bag on the floor next to his desk, the instructor grabbed the stack of certificates, slammed it onto his desk, and swayed out. As soon as I got back in my car, I patted my certificate and made a point of, after checking for cops, rolling through a stop sign. My wheels definitely were turning. Anyway, that story is called Fantasy Traffic School. Next one's called Story Time. My son never outgrew his love of my reading to him, nor did I. It started ordinarily enough. From when Jerry was a baby, I read to him. First it was Hop on Pop, Cat in the Hat, Little Engine That Could, the usual hits. We particularly loved The Carrot Seed. In that story, a little boy planted a carrot seed, and everyone in his family said it wouldn't grow. But the boy kept watering it, and finally it came up, just as a little boy always knew it would. My son mainly loved it. The boy turned out to be right. I tried, not altogether successfully, To explain that the story was about the wisdom of being persistent when you're confident you're correct. When Jerry was 7 or 8, we read The Giving Tree and talked about what the story meant. My son thought it was Save the Trees. My son was unusually mature, so I felt that I could give a shot at a more complex explanation. I said that the story is about life's path, from happiness to sadness, fatigue, and dying. The story also asks, what is too much sacrifice? And when you give a person a finger, does it make him want an arm? As usual, we ended with a hug and a promise that we would have story time forever. When Jerry was around 10, our favorite was James and the Giant Peach, a welcome break from reality. But the peach, ah yes, the peach was a soft, stealthy traveler, making no noise as it floated along, and several times during that long, silent night ride, high up over the middle of the ocean in the moonlight, James and his friends saw things that no one had ever seen before. When Jerry was 16, our favorite was the lottery, and we discussed how groupthink can make regular people do or at least ignore horrific things. For example, citizens of Nazi Germany, the snitches of Stalinist USSR, or some warrior lemmings today. Jerry was 20 and away at college. I'd read aloud over the phone. I particularly remember The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. Walter escapes into fantasy to avoid being suppressed by his strong wife. Surprisingly, that triggered quite an argument. Jerry insisted on the importance of following your dreams, while I made the case for being realistic, which made him insist he was going to take big risks. That got me more scared and more angry, but we got off the phone saying, and meaning it, that we'll always love each other. I'll fast forward. As I'm writing this, I'm on my deathbed. Jerry just read The Giving Tree again to me and said, your interpretation 70 years ago was right. The book is about life's path from exuberance to disillusionment, fatigue, and death. And I promise to read to my kids forever. Not a bad capstone to a life of story time. Anyway, that story is called Story Time. The next one is called Eliza Do Much. The opera goers tiptoed down the opera house's rained-on marble steps. Henry Higgins rushed to the curb to hail a cab when Eliza Doolittle pleaded to the crowd, "Sunflowers, just 3 pence." Higgins scoffed, "Street urchin," whereupon she kicked him in the balls. He shoved her and her basket of flowers into the rushing water beneath the curb, and he called the nearby policeman. "I am Professor Henry Higgins. This gutter snipe has assaulted me, kicking me in my, crown jewels. I want to press charges." The London Times reviewer had just come down the steps to witness the contretemps, took a photo of Higgins kicking Eliza, and a second photo with her sopping in the watery street, and smiled at Higgins. "My good man, you have just found your way into the Times. I shall capstone my review with this crown jewel. Ma'am, what's your name?" Higgins harumphed, hailed his cab, and left confident it was just bluster. But the next day, when he opened the Times, there he was, the headline, "Scholar Soaks Sunflower Seller." That night, many people came to see the now famous Eliza. They not only bought out the flowers in her basket, but dropped not just pence, but shillings and pounds. By the end of the evening, Eliza had more than 100 pounds, which back in Pygmalion days was a lot. Eliza used the money to open a covered flower stand and wrote a letter to Higgins, care of the Times, inviting him to the grand opening and a free bouquet. He came and murmured, "You should change your name to Eliza Do Much." Anyway, that story is called Eliza Do Much. The next story is called Sam's Last Concert. Let me get a little drink of water here. Okay. In the wings, Sam could hear the concertmaster tuning up the orchestra. "Damn, my hand is shaking more than usual. It's a bad Parkinson's day. Plus, it's my last concert. I'm nervous. Glad I decided on the Grieg piano concerto, but with these hands, nothing is easy." Sam had been a concert pianist his whole life. At age 11, he finished 4th in the Midwest Regional Young Artists Competition, and now, at age 83, had performed 45 concerts, including one with the Kansas City Symphony. He thought, "True, that was just in the Casey Symphony Summer Festival when lots of the A players were on vacation, but still. Somehow I wish my ex-wife were here. How could she have dumped me? I still wish you were here tonight. Do I play it safe tonight? A lot of note mistakes would make the audience think I stayed at it too long, like those star baseball players who'd rather hit 200 than retire. Or do I go for a home run? A chance at a write-up in the Kansas City Star. Roseman finishes with a flourish. The conductor gave Sam a forced smile, and Sam strode on stage. This was it. Deep breaths. Deep breaths. Damn, my hands are shaking more. I'm taking too long. I gotta get out there. Stand up straight. Old men hunch. Stride. Don't shuffle. But Sam could manage only to shuffle on stage. He hung onto the piano with one hand as he bowed his head to the audience. If I tried to bow from the waist, I could fall. And he sat down at the piano. I've had this moment so many times, but this is different. Sam used his old trick of adjusting the seat up and then back down again, not because it needed adjusting, but to buy a little more time, to ground himself before the moment of truth. And Sam began and took every reasonable risk he could, and most of the time he won. Yes, his boldness caused a few note mistakes, but only the ignorant or mean-spirited could criticize his exciting performance. It was inspiring at any age, but for an 83-year-old with advanced Parkinson's, it gives me the chills just to tell you about it. And yes, Sam got not just the usual obligatory extended applause, bestowed as much to protest classical music's dying popularity as to acknowledge the performer, but fervent applause, and then, yes, a standing ovation. Not a charity ovation, a heartfelt one. And Sam, who usually was too shy to look at the applauding audience and so would stare at the back wall, soaked in the smiling, standing people. Then he sighed and plodded off stage for what he thought was the last time. Sam shuffled into his dressing room, closed the door, and dropped into a chair. I survived. I didn't embarrass myself. But I can't go to the reception. That's like a retirement party where everybody tries to make light of it being the beginning of the end. My end. There was a knock on the door. Daddy? His daughter opened the door and gushed. You were amazing. You were really amazing. Come on, they're all waiting for you. Sam knew there was no avoiding it, so he trudged downstairs. When he arrived, the chatter morphed into applause, and he thought, no one likes long speeches and nothing ungracious. I should be a good boy. But he couldn't resist saying what he really felt. Honestly, I can't stand the thought this will be my last performance, and he teared up. A 4-year-old toddled up to him and, do you want to play in my class? And Sam Roseman went on to play more concerts than he had in his entire life, in preschools and elementary schools. First just locally, then around the country. He never got paid, indeed had to pay his travel expenses, but didn't begrudge it. I can't think of a better way to spend my money than to teach young kids to love classical music, and that old people aren't necessarily irrelevant. Anyway, that story is called Sam's Last Concert. Next one's called Prince Charming. Prince Charming is not the cardboard character he's portrayed as. You see, it is his good looks that, as with many people, make him especially looks conscious, because that's what others seem to care about. But inside, he, and he actually has a name, Solomon, is tortured by something more substantive. He's well aware that he did nothing to earn his title or wealth. He thinks, I'm a parasite. So Solomon renounced his throne, and using the knowledge he acquired from trying Cinderella's slipper on all the princess wannabes, he became a shoemaker specializing in comfortable but attractive women's shoes, not a stiletto heel in sight. And so Solomon became respected throughout the land, while the king and queen were, like many leaders, liberal or conservative, reviled for their shallow pomp and often unethical exercise of power. Women young and old came for Solomon's shoes, expensive custom ones, inexpensive off-the-rack ones, and if a customer were poor, he'd give them the shoes free, used ones that people traded in or new custom ones that the customer decided she didn't like. Solomon dated a few of the women, but couldn't find one that he wanted to share his life with, until Rachel walked in. He was shocked to see her. After all, she was the king and queen's chief advisor, and after Solomon renounced his princehood, they disowned him. But as always, Rachel was an independent, wise thinker who made decisions on the merits, and she admired Solomon for trading a title for the chance to earn his keep. Solomon was impressed that although Rachel had money, she bought an off-the-rack pair, and one that, while attractive, wasn't showy. Rachel was just average looking, a little overweight, and a few years older than Solomon, so his reflexive thought was to not ask her on a date. But he reflected and thought, decided to. And they enjoyed each other a lot, whether discussing ethics over hot mulled cider, romping in the fields even in the snow, and yes, snuggling in bed. But what moved Solomon to want to marry her was when she quit her job as chief advisor to the king and queen. She explained, "I'm tired of their ignoring my advice, especially when my advice is to lower taxes rather than expand their already lavish castle and bloated, inefficient government." Solomon asked, "So, do you have any idea what you'd like to do to earn a living?" She replied, "Be your partner in the shoe store." He replied, "Yes, absolutely, but would you also be my partner in life?" She said not a word, but looked into his eyes, cried, and hugged him. Some of the townspeople, who Solomon and Rachel privately called the mob, laughed. One of them, in the middle of the night, even painted graffiti on the side of their shoe store's cottage. "See how far they've fallen," it read. But Solomon and Rachel decided to invite the entire town to the wedding. Because they thought it wiser to use the money to buy a home than on a party, even a wedding party, they held it at the field where they had romped and made luncheon potluck. Solomon and Rachel invited his parents, the king and queen, but were fairly sure they wouldn't come. After all, they had renounced him, and Rachel had quit working for them. But while the king and queen were the last to arrive, they did, just in time for the ceremony. And when Solomon and Rachel, in their exchange of vows, simultaneously said, "And we pledge to give as much love to the world as we give to each other," the queen cried, and the king pursed his lips, and the royal couple promised each other that from this day forth they would try to live and lead by those words of their children. Yes, the king and queen would think of Rachel as their child. And now, for real, they lived happily ever after. So that story was called Prince Charming. Next story is called E.T. Meets Cinderella's Stepmother. I promise this is the only other fairy tale one. Night after E.T. phoned home and then returned home to his planet, he found himself missing Elliot and all the friends on bicycles that saved him from the FBI. So E.T. convinced an intergalactic pilot to let him stow away on the next flight to Earth. As expected, the reunion between Elliot and E.T. was joyous, but soon Elliot and his friends tired of E.T.'s novelty. One said, "E.T., you're like a pet. You need care and feeding. If I want to play with an E.T., I'll go to Toys R Us and buy an E.T. robot. Besides, I'd rather play with somebody good-looking." That last statement particularly hurt E.T. He had suppressed how ugly he was. So he toddled away. Elliot had told him that a librarian is a good source of information. So he asked the librarian, "I'm ugly. How can I find a friend who will accept me for who I am?" The librarian tried, "Well, how about going to meetups?" E.T. said, "That feels too random." Then the librarian tried, "Good people won't be lookist." But E.T. didn't think that was true enough. Finally, in frustration, the librarian said, "Maybe you need to find another ugly person." And that piqued E.T.'s interest, so he asked, "Can you give me an example?" "Can you give me an example?" The librarian said, "How about the ugly stepmother in Cinderella?" E.T. asked, "Do you know where she lives?" And the librarian, who knows almost everything, gave him directions and added, "Oh, by the way, her name isn't Ugly Stepmother or even Wicked Stepmother. It's Lady Tremaine." Lady Tremaine had fallen on hard times, so she fired her longtime butler and answered her own door. She had spent almost all her inheritance, and her stepchildren had long abandoned her. E.T. explained his situation, and she said that hers was the same, that people rejected her for her ugliness. She didn't realize that the rejections were more for her personality's ugliness than her face's. For example, it was jealousy of Cinderella's looks that drove Lady Tremaine to make Cinderella stay home and use a toothbrush to clean the house's grout while the stepchildren went to the ball. E.T., perhaps not the best judge of earthling attractiveness, said, "You know, you could be pretty if you did something with your clothes and makeup." Grateful for the ray of hope, Lady Tremaine offered E.T. a cup of tea and then asked if he would go to Macy's with her to pick out clothes and get a makeover from one of the army of cosmetologists. E.T. agreed, although resenting that she didn't ask a thing about him. While still in the store after the makeover in a new outfit which she kept on, a guy hit on her, saying she was beautiful. E.T. agreed, and the man invited her to a party. E.T., seeing his suggestion bear such fruit, went to the men's department and tried to get himself outfitted. But there was nothing in size cistern, so he just bought a watch cap in his favorite color, celestial blue, and waddled out. E.T. liked how he looked, and lonely, wanted to show it off. So, recalling where and when the party was, he showed up. The man was now ignoring Lady Tremaine, so she became a wallflower, stricken. On seeing E.T., she was grateful to see him. He said again how beautiful she looked, which made her, in her humbled state, say how nice she thought E.T. looked in his watch cap. And E.T. and Lady Tremaine started to date, and for Christmas dinner invited Elliot and his family, her stepchildren, and Cinderella. Nary was a sadistic word spoken, except when Lady Tremaine joked, "Cinderella, can I get you a toothbrush?" Anyway, that story is called E.T. Meets Cinderella. The next story is called A Rose's Life. It wasn't love at first sight in New York, where I grew up. I barely noticed the rose bush, that romantic flower factory. But when I came to California to go to grad school, and I was filled with fear, I'm not smart enough for Berkeley, let alone a PhD program. One way I tried to stay calm was to grow houseplants in my apartment. But that soon wasn't enough. So I got a rose bush, put it in a 5-gallon soy sauce container that I got from a Chinese restaurant, and hung it on a nail on the exterior windowsill. It grew well, and so in the apartment complex's common area, I planted a few more varieties of rose. That made me aware of rose's dark side. They're prone to fungus, which means that to look good, most need to be sprayed with fungicide. Yuck! Grad school was giving me the full dose of classroom instruction, so I decided to teach myself how to hybridize roses, specifically how to create roses that are disease-resistant, what I've since called no-spray roses and beauties roses. My secondary criterion for my breeding program is that roses be compact, no long, bare, wrinkly canes. Compactness, even more important, a more important plus is for most rose gardeners are that they're old and don't have much of any yard and don't want to dig deep planting holes. That was long before the internet, so I spent a few hours in the Stribing Arboretum's library and took notes on key articles and sections of books on the subject. Then I started hybridizing, plant sex. When I had a question, I called and later visited leading rose hybridizers, Harvey Davidson, Ralph Moore, and Harm Seville, who graciously answered my questions. As with all plants, when you put the pollen, that's the sperm, of one variety on the stigma, that's the female part of the plant, its vagina, the sperm and egg merge and make seeds, babies, each different, just like when human parents make babies. After a few months, the seeds are ripe. They go into the fridge for 2 months to simulate winter, and then, like all seeds, must be planted and watered. Alas, there are a million reasons why a rose seedling might be unworthy. Weak growth, disease-prone, gawky habit, sparse leaves, and, of course, unattractive or too few flowers. So by June, I've thrown out 95% of the year's seedlings, and by November, I end up keeping just 1 or 2 for further trial the next year. Fast forward 35 years, I've made thousands of crosses and have 2 varieties on the market, neither of which I'm crazy about, but in the past few years I've come up with 3 I like, the culmination of decades I've been hybridizing roses. I've sent cuttings of them to wholesale nurseries to test, and I give a few to friends and neighbors. Now, everything that I said before in this story is true, but I'm now going to make up the rest, but maybe you'll enjoy hearing about it. In 2018, I gave Jeannie, an 85-year-old neighbor, one of the miniature roses. Let's call it, well, Rose. Jeannie planted Rose on the walkway in her cottage. When Jeannie died in 2022, her cottage was sold to a young couple. They stared at Rose, whose leaves had become withered from the few months of neglect, and its canes had become a bit wrinkled and grayish. Rose cried as the man dug her out and threw her into the recycling bin. The truck took the recycling and dumped its load into the shredder for reuse as compost. Although Rose felt no pain, she cried again. Rose ended up in a bag of compost, which was bought by a couple with a 5-year-old. They all planted a Tamukiyama Japanese maple, a cultivar so good that it's been in commerce for hundreds of years. Plus, each Tamukiyama tree can live 80 years or longer. I'm betting on longer because the family planted in soil that was amended with compost that was enriched with Rose. Rose, I imagine, is smiling. Anyway, that story is called Rose. The next story is called Ikebana Circle. Ikebana is the Japanese art of flower arranging. It integrates earth at the bottom, human in the middle, and sky at the top. Often it's framed by a circle. Lily's husband died at a good age, 86, and after the appropriate period of mourning, she decided that while still able, she would have an adventure. After all, her whole adult life, she was just an Ikebana flower arranger, a life beautiful, but free of adventure. So Lily took her modest inheritance and flew to San Francisco, where she knew a cafe waitress who had immigrated from her town and agreed to sponsor Lily, guaranteeing her a job. Lily started as a dishwasher and, of course, didn't like it as much as Ikebana, but accepted that she needed to start somewhere. And soon, She was promoted to busser, setting tables, pouring coffee, clearing tables. At night, Lily made ikebana, which she sold to restaurants and hotels. She did it not just for the money, although she certainly could use it with the exorbitant cost of living, even in the Bay Area's bad areas, but it was also spiritually renewing. Often, Lily would bring an ikebana to the cafe and bring it on the table of a customer she liked. Her favorite was an old, quiet man, simply dressed. When she put the ikebana on his table for the third time, he asked if she would like to take a walk with him sometime. Nervous, she just mumbled, "Thank you," and scurried off with her coffee pot. But the next time he came in, she said, "I would be honored to walk with you." Soon he invited her to his modest home. But after she agreed to move in with him, he then admitted that he was a retired venture capitalist. She didn't know what that was, so he explained that his job was to find money for tiny businesses that promised to make the world better. They enjoyed the early December of their years, indeed honestly loved each other, even though sex for them couldn't go beyond kissing, cuddling, and fondling. And then he got Parkinson's. Not only did she not resent caring for him, she loved it, until the end, which wasn't as pleasant as her husband's end, who had died peacefully in his sleep. He left all his $26 million to her. She returned to Japan to live in her simple apartment and spent the rest of her life driving into the country, giving rural high school computer teachers an ikebana. Inside its circle was a sky, represented by a cherry blossom branch, a person represented by shiny leaves, and on its earth, 25 million yen, $200,000. All she said to the teachers was, "Give it to a student who could make the world better." Anyway, that story is called Ikebana Circle. This next story is called Playing Hooky. I was so in the mood for waffles. My mom said no because there was no time, but I begged her. She poured batter into the waffle maker, and I was happy. Then her phone rang. It was her boss, and she forgot about the waffle. When I smelled it burning, I pulled at her and said, Mommy, it's burning." She turned off the waffle maker and finished her phone call. When she opened the cover, it was burned. She said a bad word and then, "Take a yogurt from the refrigerator. You'll eat it in the car." Then I remembered that she had to sign the permission slip for my class field trip to the African American Civil War Museum. I had a hard time finding it in my packbag, and I saw her tapping her foot nervously. She scribbled out her signature, grabbed her briefcase, and we rushed to the car. She didn't even buckle me into the child seat, and she drove fast. She had to slam on her brakes because the light was turning red. When we got to my school, the schoolyard was empty already. The kids had already gone in. We raced to the student door, but it was locked. My mom said another bad word, and we rushed toward the front entrance where we'd have to tell the school secretary why we were late. But before we got to the door, my mom stopped and said, "Let's play hooky." She called her boss and said that I had just gotten sick and she didn't have time to get a babysitter. I didn't know parents lie. Then she told me that she knows someone who works at a bakery, so we went and saw how croissants are made. You have to put in a ton of butter into the dough and then roll it out 3 times, cut it up and stack the layers, and somehow that gets you hundreds of layers. Wow! I was loving watching and especially tasting. Croissants are delicious, especially the chocolate ones. It hit me that while I was eating a croissant, my class was probably doing math. We were working on something called associative and distributive. I don't remember what the other word is. When we got back in the car, my mother drove us around the cool 5-sided building where she works. It's called the Pentagon. It's CIA headquarters. I asked if she was a spy. She laughed and said she's one of the many people who work there to just read and write things. That was boring, so I asked her lots of questions about what it's like to be a spy. Most times she said, "I don't know," or "That's classified, I can't tell you, even though you're my son." But she did tell me that the CIA tries using cats as spies. The cats were equipped with a tiny antenna so they could transmit secret conversations back to the CIA. I was loving hearing about that and imagined that if we were in class now, we'd probably be on spelling, or if we were lucky, art. We were learning how to make origami. My mom drove me back to school. I was in time for social studies. The teacher was talking about Civil War, but I was still thinking about cat spies. I think she saw me daydreaming, and so she called at me. "Justin, what was the Civil War about?" I could only come up with, "Freeing the blacks?" She sighed and said, "Pay attention. This is important." I thought my day with Mom was more important, or at least better. I'll ask Mom if we can play hooky again tomorrow. Anyway, that story is called Hooky. The next story is called A Little Life. Linda turned off her alarm clock, petted her still sleeping dog Daisy, and crept out of bed. She drank coffee as she dressed. She was embarrassed that she preferred to dress in the librarian stereotype. Today it was a dark jacket over a light blue blouse and black pants, and yes, sensible shoes. She strolled to the bus. She rarely had to hurry, and arrived at the library at 8:50 in time for the library's 9 o'clock opening. At the reference desk, she was appropriately pleasant, encouraging, and restrained. After work, she had a light dinner. Then, except for Tuesday nights when she had choir rehearsal, she usually carried a hot chocolate, which she liked for dessert, got into a comfortable nightgown, and retreated to her bed with Daisy, where she'd read. Or she'd knit simple things, a bookmark for co-workers and favorite customers, or fingerless hand warmers for choir members. The church kept the rooms cool. One evening, Linda got a call. She thought, telemarketers, they're calling later and later. But it wasn't a telemarketer. It was someone claiming to be a producer for American Idol. Linda didn't believe it until he said, "A member of your choir sent us a video of your solo on Bridge Over Troubled Waters, told us about you, and we're impressed. Actually, all 4 of us producers think you could win. You're just what we're looking for, a normal, regular person, a librarian no less, who, when she sings, blows everyone away. You could be the next Susan Boyle, maybe better. Would you like to audition for American Idol?" Linda was overwhelmed, took a breath, and thought, even if I somehow were to win, look at Susan Boyle. She had her 15 minutes of fame, and then everyone wanted a piece of her. They dolled her up. Singing went from a pleasure to a business. She lost her peace of mind. If I remember right, she had to go to a mental health clinic. Then Linda said in her kindest voice, "I'm sorry, but I need to say no." The producer replied, "I know you're expecting me to argue with you, but to be honest, I understand." And Linda hung up, petted Daisy, sipped her hot chocolate, and returned to her knitting. Anyway, that story is called A Little Life. The next story is called Scrooge on December 26th. The morning after Christmas, at least some of Scrooge's Christmas spirit had faded. In bed in his usual sleeping cap, Scrooge looked to the alarm clock, 6:30. Normally by now he would have jumped out of bed to get ready to open his money-lending business at 7:30. But today he thought, I deserve a little more Christmas spirit. Maybe I can lie in bed a little longer. But then he thought, there's nothing wrong with business. I charge fair interest and people need to borrow, for example, to grow their business, to pay for college, to pay for Christmas presents they bought until they have earned enough in the coming months. Oh, I guess I'll get out of bed. Scrooge looked at the envelope that the 3 gentlemen, who he called the 3 charioteers, had left. He thought, on one hand, it's true. He who has more should give to those who have less. After all, much of that isn't their fault. I mean, think of Tiny Tim. Think of poor Bob Cratchit, who was born not bright. That wasn't his fault. On the other hand, the more handouts we give, the more we reward laziness. If I keep my money, I have more to lend to people who can, for example, build a business that provides goods and services to lots of people. And yes, while I was too harsh in saying that if the poor want to be lazy, let them die and we'll get rid of the surplus population, there is a grain of truth in that. Is the world really better with people who are lazy? Of course, I'm happy to help support the Tiny Tims and even the Bob Cratchits of the world. But there are many people who are undeserving. If I put money in this envelope, who knows who the money is going to go to? Scrooge took a middle ground and put a modest amount in the envelope. Before opening his store at 7:30, again, Scrooge chose a middle ground. Although the interest rate he had charged had been moderate, right in there with the market, he decided to infuse just a bit of Christmas spirit. He put up a sign, I'm lowering my interest rate slightly, and anyone who needs a little more time to make their payment, no problem and no interest. Your slightly less grinchy banker, Ebenezer Scrooge. And Scrooge opened the door feeling right with the world. So that story is called Scrooge on December 26th. Next story is called I Invited a Dwarf to Coffee. Bella. This is Bella speaking. It was Christmas night, my worst yet. After the anesthetic hoo-ha of manufactured merriment had worn off, I was left with myself, a single woman at 33, unhappy and fat. I love my job, but that's not enough. So after putting everything in the dishwasher, recycling the paper plates, and trying yet again to clean the red wine that someone spilled on my beige carpet, I crawled into bed and hugged my stuffed dog. Now it's Jack talking. It's noon on December 31st, and I'm dreading tonight. I'm not a hats and horns kind of guy, even if the party were dwarf-friendly. For example, I can't reach the food at the back of the buffet. And get on a bar stool? Ha! It's even hard to get myself up on most sofas. That's okay. I'm comfy at home. I'll just go to Trader Joe's, buy a spanakopita and cheap champagne, and I'm good. Now Bella meets Jack. In Trader Joe's at 2 p.m. on New Year's Eve, Jack tried to reach the champagne to no avail. I offered to get it, and he was grateful. While I can't say that Jack is my vision of the ideal man, I appreciated his grateful smile, something I was hungry for. And when he rushed to get right behind me on the checkout line, I felt flattered. Yeah, I felt uncomfortable too. A dwarf with me? A 5'7", 160-pound woman? I couldn't believe that I jumped to, if we had kids, would it be a dwarf? The odds are 25%. Jack wasn't shy about starting a conversation. That was nice of you to get the champagne. It, along with the spanakopita, is my solo New Year's Eve celebration. By any chance, would you share them with me? I said, God, you move fast. Why don't we get coffee and see? Anyway, that story is called I Invited a Dwarf to Coffee. The next story is called In Tune. I'm 84 years old and thinking about moving to a senior community to take pressure off my daughter, who looks in on me all the time. Before I go, I've long had a desire to play a little piano concert, not at some fancy place, just in my living room on the little spinet piano that I've used more for decoration than for playing. All I can play are ridiculously old songs like Moonlight Bay, Over There, and Let Me Call You Sweetheart. I practiced a fair amount, and then placed a little ad for my concert in my neighborhood's newsletter. Then I realized I hadn't had the piano tuned ever, so I went to the local piano shop, and on the bulletin board there were business cards for a bunch of piano technicians. Only one was a woman, and so, let me be honest with you, even at my age I like women. I called her. I was surprised that she was able to come over the same day. I soon found out why. She had just printed up the business cards, and I would be her very first customer. I figured that for a duffer like me, on a piano that's probably worth less than the tuning cost, she'd be fine. Certainly my piano could be her guinea pig. No problem. Because she said I'd be her first customer, I figured she was young. But when she walked in the door, she was around my age. She tuned the piano fine, although I'm sure I couldn't tell the difference if it was tuned well or not. After she finished, she asked if I wanted to try it out. Impish me, I played while singing the lyric, Let Me Call You Sweetheart, I'm in love with you. She bowed her head. I don't know if it was an embarrassment to reject me or because she hated my horrible singing voice. But I decided to ask, will you come to my concert? And she nodded. She was the only person who showed up. I didn't mind, and as it turns out, neither did she. That story is called In Tune. Next story is called Stars and Stripes Forever. On his stereo at home, or the one in his car, Michael played Stars and Stripes Forever for at least an hour each day. Some people thought it was nostalgia for his army buddies. Others wondered if it was balm from memories from his tour in Afghanistan. Still others thought Michael simply was patriotic. It was none of those. Michael played Stars and Stripes Forever to anesthetize himself from his loneliness. You see, Michael is a forbidding person at 6'5", 280 pounds, and a tough face, including a square chin. He could be cast as an SS officer who tortures Jews, and his shy and taciturn personality cements people's avoiding him. The only person who ever really liked Michael was his dad, who passed away while Michael was in Afghanistan. Michael loved playing catch with his dad to see who could throw harder. When Michael got old enough to throw harder than his dad hugged him. When Michael said school was boring, his dad didn't prod him to be more academic. His dad said, I understand. But what Michael missed most was that his dad wasn't ashamed to be a Vietnam vet and would play Stars and Stripes Forever all the time on his cassette player while accompanying on the piano, and would invite Michael to march him around in his Boy Scout uniform and with his BB gun. And when Michael's mother, only half-joking, mimicked the mother in the movie A Christmas Story, you'll poke your eyes out, Michael's dad would roll his eyes, stick his tongue out at her and smile, Michael, march on! And with increased enthusiasm, his dad played and Michael marched through the house, onto the bed, out to the backyard, and back in the living room. Michael's mom shook her head, but realized that this was good, among life's better moments, and hugged them both. Now Michael thinks, yes, Stars and Stripes Forever. Anyway, that story is called Stars and Stripes Forever. The next story is called A 12-Year-Old Goes to Yankee Stadium Solo. I was surprised. You'll let me go alone to Yankee Stadium? My mom replied, I know that parents don't want to seem irresponsible, but although you're just 12, I know you're responsible. You'll keep your eyes open. You'll be fine. In fact, you'll grow from it. I was scared to go. What if I get lost? What if someone robs me? What if I feel lonely? But I pictured how amazing it would be. Yankee Stadium. And then I could tell my friends I went alone. When I got off the bus, I just followed the crowd. Left, right, left again, and there it was. The house that Ruth built. Mom offered me money so I could get a good seat, but they were like $30. The really good seats were like $200. Besides, I wanted to pay for it myself, so I got a $10 seat. I climbed to the fourth deck, hearing cracks of the bat at batting practice and seeing excited kids, tired old people, smells of hot dogs, nachos, and beer. People were lined up at the radar gun. The sign said, "How fast can you pitch? $3." I did 48 miles an hour. I thought that was fast, until I heard that the pros throw in the 90s. Finally, I reached the opening for section 433 and climbed from the breezeway into the stadium itself. I had seen it on TV, but in real life, the lawn was so much bigger than it looked on TV, and the red dirt ringing the grass diamond looked like it was not for a game, but for a painting. But I was shocked at how far from home plate section 433 was. The players looked like insects, and I couldn't see the ball at all. And I was way up too high to catch a ball, even if someone hit a home run. My grandpa told me the Yankee Stadium had monuments to Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, and someone I'd forget, right on the field, way out near center field fence. But they weren't there, which made me sad. That seemed a great way to remember the great ones, right there on the field. Plus, it would have been fun to think about someone hitting a ball all the way out there. The game started, and yes, I could hardly see anything, so a bad idea came to me. There were lots of empty seats right near the field. I figured if by the third inning no one sat there, I could. So I did, and it was amazing. I could practically smell the players, and of course could see everything. But only a minute later, a man in a uniform, kind of mean-looking, towered over me and said, "Ticket, kid." I said I was sorry and crept back into the breezeway. But I couldn't make myself go back up to section 433. I had to try again. So I walked a few sections away, snuck down to the field seats, and slunk down in an empty aisle seat so I didn't have to make anyone move. But an usher said, "I need to see your ticket, son." This time, though, the woman next to me said to the usher in a kind voice, "Oh, he's with me. He's my grandson." The usher sniffed, smiled, and walked away. I thanked her, and for a while I just watched the game very happy. Then she saw me watching or keeping score in the program and said, "I'm not so good at this. By any chance, do you know how to keep score?" I couldn't believe it. I do that at home all the time. Not just what the batter did, but how many balls and strikes each batter got. I said I'd love to. And the woman gave me her program. She even let me take the program home. I almost got to take home something else. A foul ball came toward me. I tried to go get up and get it, but it bounced around between the seats, and another kid got it, but that was okay. It was so exciting to get even close. When the game was over, I thanked the woman again and skipped back to the bus. I stopped at a cart with Yankee souvenirs, including a packet of small pennants, one for each of the American League teams. It would cost $15 plus $2 tax. I had it, but it would be 3 weeks' allowance. I bought it anyway. Back in my room, I hung the pennants and wondered if I'd ever have such a great day again. Okay, so that story is called A 12-Year-Old Goes to Yankee Stadium Alone. The next story is called The First Date. After an entertaining college life, which extended a couple of years after college, I decided I'd like to get married and have kids. I had run through the few women my friends set me up with, so I decided to rely on Match.com. To increase my chances of finding Ms. Right, I did the reaching out. That way, I got to pick out who I wanted to see rather than responding, which could have tempted me to say yes to people I was ambivalent about. And if a woman didn't respond within 48 hours or the response seemed shallow, I moved on. There are millions of fish in the Match.com sea. Elena passed the pretest, so I was excited while waiting for her at Starbucks. Would she look anything like her picture? Would she be as caring as she seemed in her texts and phone call? Would we have chemistry? She walked in and I was relieved that her face looked like her picture, although she was a little heavier. I felt guilty that it bothered me, and I wondered whether that reaction is evolutionarily hardwired or a socially constructed bias. After just a bit of small talk, I couldn't resist bringing up the marriage and baby thing. "So, you wrote that you're interested in a long-term relationship. What are you envisioning?" I couldn't bring myself to say the words marriage or children, but she said them almost matter-of-factly. "Oh, I'm looking for a husband and to have 2, even 3 kids." It felt too early to get into detail, so I changed the subject. I like to get the bad news out of the way, so I said I still dream of being a screenwriter. What do you think of that? Elena's face dropped a little. I stayed silent and waiting her out. It worked. She said, "Well, I'm not so sure about my own career. I'm working in a nonprofit's PR department, but that feels too far from helping people. I really don't know what I want to be when I grow up, and I'm supposed to be grown up already. Well, at least sort of grown up. I liked that we were equally confused. We talked a little more about family, hobbies. We both liked travel and bicycling, and I decided I wanted to see her again. I wanted to end our first date while I was still ahead, or at least not behind. So although we had talked for only 20 minutes, I said, Elena, I have to go. That was lame, but I couldn't think of anything better. I appreciated her response. Did I do anything to turn you off? I said no, and reflexively took her hand. I'd like to see you again if you would. Kind of flatly, she said, okay. Was that just nervousness, or was she not into me? I got up, and then she did. Now, how do I say goodbye? Do I kiss her? No, it felt too early. Do I hug her? How long? I looked her in the eye, saw that she didn't flinch or step back, so I hugged her, tentatively, my chest just barely touching hers. I was tempted to put her on the back, pat her on the back the way platonic friends hug, but resisted. But I'm sure that was the worst hug she ever got. That was 42 years ago. We've been married for 40 years, have 2 kids and 4 grandchildren. I sell insurance and write screenplays for fun, knowing full well they'll never be made into a movie. That's somehow freeing. I get to write what I want. Elena is now in her 25th year as executive director of a nonprofit that takes urban kids on bicycling adventures. While our first date was good, I'm not sure I could have predicted all of that. Anyway, that story is called The First Date. The next story is called My Life's Favorite Moment. I enjoyed watching the kids from King High School playing touch football on the street. After watching a couple times, it was clear who was the worst player, a kid named Brandon. On the rare times that a quarterback threw to him, he'd usually drop the ball. On the rarer times that he got to play quarterback, his arm was weak and inaccurate. Today, when they chose sides, he didn't even get picked, and he slung on his heavy backpack, filled with so many books that at the top 2 textbooks stuck out. When I used to coach at King, my focus was on finding the best, spending more of my time helping the best make the most of their talent. Yet now I found myself attracted to this kid. But what the hell could I coach him on? Be a kicker? Actually, yeah, field goal kicker. But could I actually help him? Would he want help? Maybe he'll even be offended that I offered. But this would be the time. He was walking away right past me. Hey, kid. Yes? I know this seems weird, but I was a former assistant football coach at King, and I've been watching you guys. I think you have the potential to be a field goal kicker for the team. Why in the world would you think that? 2 reasons. You're persistent, you keep coming out to play even though you're bad, pick last, and get made fun of. Field goal kickers need persistence. Practice, practice, practice. More important, you're amazingly calm. When you screw up or even when a player razzes you, you stay calm. That's the most important thing in a field goal kicker. The stands are full of screaming fans, and you have to be ice, calmly doing your kicking ritual as though the seats were empty. Brandon's eyes widened. I don't need money. I'm just looking for something meaningful to do. Would you like me to coach you a bit? I don't know. Maybe try 1 short lesson. We'll see how it goes. Brandon's face softened, but nervous, embarrassed. He said, I have to do my homework. I can see you're pretty studious. Your backpack was the most packed of all the kids. But if you had been picked, you would have stayed to play. Brandon blushed at having been caught and said, I guess we can try it, but where? I don't want the kids to see. Oh, we can walk to King's Field. It's summer. It's empty now. There's no need to bore you with the details, but long story short, I taught him the field goal kicking technique, and then he practiced with ever longer field goals. Actually, we start with the point after touchdown, just 13 yards, then 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, and 45. By the end of the summer, he could make 80% from 40 yards out and 60% from 45. So I could honestly suggest that he try out for King's Junior Varsity if he wanted to. He did. Would you sit in the stands to watch? I said normally tryouts are closed, but as a former assistant coach there, I think the coach will allow it. In fact, the coach allowed me to sit on the bench. In the tryout, Brandon made 2 of 2 at 25, 2 of 2 at 35. Then the coach pushed it to 45. Brandon looked at me for just a moment. Longer would have made both of us nervous. Brandon missed the first 45 by a lot, but then took 3 deep breaths and made the second, although barely. Not wanting to show too much emotion, he just smiled at me, and I mirrored that. Right then, the coach told him he'd made the team. He'd be the backup field goal kicker on the junior varsity. We went out for ice cream, and what surprised me was what he said was he was most looking forward to was putting on the uniform. It'll make me feel good that I belong to something non-academic. I'm tired of just being a brainiac. I went to every game, but the first string kicker was pretty good, and Brandon just sat on the bench. Then one Saturday morning, Brandon phoned me and said that the coach had just called him to say that the first string kicker was at a party last night, and to show off to a girl he was trying to impress, while holding a drink, he jumped from the second-floor apartment into the swimming pool. Except he didn't quite make it. His kicking leg hit the side of the pool, and he badly bruised his ankle. He'd likely be out for just one game, but for today's game, I would be the field goal kicker. Not every game requires a field goal kicker. Sometimes the team makes touchdowns. It was too far from a field goal, but I was hopeful. I sat in my usual spot in the stands, and although Brandon's team was way behind, in the fourth quarter, the first field goal situation occurred, a 42-yarder. Brandon looked down, not at the players, certainly not at me, just at the ball. He took those 3 breaths, followed the technique, and the ball went up and through the uprights. Then, before he even looked at the players or coach, he looked up at me and nodded. That thank you was my life's favorite moment. That story is called My Life's Favorite Moment. The next story, and I think it's the last one, is called The Collector. I trudged off the train and limped the 3 blocks back to my apartment above a candy store. Next to the door, I dropped my work bag that has my welding gloves, pliers, and speed square. I pulled off my knee brace and the truss that holds up my back. Even though I was sure there was soot left on my face, I didn't look in the mirror. I didn't want to be reminded that I looked more like I was 55 than 45. Anyway, no one's going to see me. Tired as usual, I put a frozen dinner in the microwave and poured a glass of wine, what the experts say are 2 glasses. A glass of wine is 5 ounces. I didn't want to go to sleep at 7 o'clock because then I'd get up too early. But I didn't have the energy, or was it the motivation, to do anything other than turn on the TV to whatever channel it was on. It was Comedy Central, but nothing could make me laugh or even crack a smile. That's a typical day and night. The weekends are worse. I have nothing I had to do, and usually I can't make myself do anything optional. So I just hang around my apartment and watch TV and take little walks. One Saturday, I walked downstairs and saw that the candy store had a sign, Valentine's Day coming, holiday help wanted, apply within. I think that giving chocolate for Valentine's Day is sappy, but because I was bored and could use the money, I filled out an application. I wasn't sure I'd take the job, but if they offered it, I could turn it down. But they hired me for Saturdays and Sundays through Valentine's Day, and I figured, why not? The first few hours were what you'd expect. Well-dressed people who could afford $30 a pound candy. When Trader Joe's across the street sells a pound of Belgian chocolates in a heart box for $9.99. But then an obviously homeless woman in a ratty cloth coat walked in and asked for a free sample. We're allowed to give them. As I gave it to her, I tried to give her a kindly look. Maybe it was my imagination or even a secret wish, but as she thanked me, she seemed a little teary and then plodded out. The next Saturday, she came in and the same thing happened. After she left, I asked my coworker who worked there full time whether the woman had come in during the week. No. The next Saturday was the day before Valentine's Day, and again she came in. I snuck her 3 pieces of chocolate. This time she was teary. It was just about time for my lunch break, and without her seeing me, I followed her out. On the street, she stopped to pick up a used napkin and a Doritos bag that somebody had dropped, and she put them into the garbage can. I followed her around the corner to the residential area. A block later, she saw a pile of dog poop on a parking strip. She pulled out a poop bag from her coat, cleaned it up, and carried it until she saw a garbage can and dropped it in. After another block, she turned up the pathway to a house. No, it was a mansion. At that point, I let myself be seen. No surprise, she was embarrassed, but after a moment, to regain her composure, she asked if I'd like to come in. On her stylish living room table sat a heart-shaped bowl with all the pieces of chocolate I had given her. She said, "It gives me more pleasure to look at your acts of kindness than the evanescent pleasure of eating it." I didn't know what evanescent meant, but I kind of got her drift. I had heard that some rich people hide their wealth by underdressing. I was intimidated by it all, so I wanted to run out, and I stepped back toward the door, but she stopped me and asked, "May I take you out to dinner for Valentine's Day?" Honestly, my first reaction was, could she be my meal ticket away from welding, away from my ruined back and knee? And who knows, even though she's rich, maybe she's nice. She's not ugly, and it was sweet that she saved the chocolates. So I said yes. Anyway, that was the last story. These are some upbeat stories from my new book, Soloists, 234 short stories of introverts and outsiders facing a dilemma. As usual, I welcome you. Can check that book out. I welcome you doing that on Amazon. It's Soloists, and you can find it by just searching on Soloist and my last name, Nemko, Nemko. In any event, I welcome your thumbs up and accept your thumbs down. I always look forward to your comments, and especially like it if you hit the share button below. Share on your social media so that my efforts can have broader impact. And I am flattered if you choose to subscribe to my channel. And because this is going to be a podcast, not just a YouTube video, I like to end each one of these with my favorite quote, which I believe is more relevant today than ever. We find comfort among those who agree with us, growth among those who don't.